out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and download. Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative, and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and download.
So nice, we had to play it twice. Welcome to the show. It's Narativ Live on a Friday night. It's the after show, and we've got a very exciting show tonight because we're talking to Noel Casler, who you see right there next to us. He's a brilliant person to have on because for many years, 6 seasons of The Apprentice, he was able to get a first-hand view of what it was like to be inside the Trump inner circle when they were not the presidents of the United States and not the first family of the United States. They were reality show stars, so they were a little bit more naughty, I should say. So hello, Noel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Zev. I appreciate you having me on.
It's great to have you on. Also here, LB in LA and Greg Oliar. There's a dollar, from New York. LB, you know Noel really well, so you can tell us a little bit about why his job was so interesting, and then we'll talk to him a little bit about what the years that he spent there.
I know Noel through Twitter. Of all things, we never crossed paths, but I kind of can't believe we didn't, Noel. I just don't think I've ever seen Noel get a proper setup of actually what his job was, and for people to really understand it. Because if you're going to measure it, and you're going to measure time and sort of witnessing of events of Donald Trump and his spawn and what they were up to, I don't know that anybody had a front row seat like Noel for as long as he had it. Certainly, Mary Trump is wonderful, and I love her book, and she's so brave and incredible, and such a great writer. But she didn't see what Noel saw.
Because she's family. Family. They don't get to see as much as the celebrity circuit. So Noel, tell us what it was. Right. Tell us what the job was all about.
Tell us your job.
Well, I worked in talent logistics since 1993 on in live television. So it's a very specific thing. There's a small group of people that freelance and they go from show to show. So if you're watching the Super Bowl halftime show, that's the same people that are handling the talent on the VMAs, that are handling the talent on the, Tony Awards, to the Grammys, the Oscars, all that stuff. And I did all that stuff for 20 years. Then you do smaller shows. When you're free on a Sunday night, you want to make a buck or something, you do something like The Apprentice. And I took that gig as a lark because a friend of mine was the talent, executive, and she needed what is known as like the A-team of talent handlers. I was kind of the top guy to handle difficult talent.
Right.
So explain that. Explain what a talent handler is.
What does that do?
So I worked with Michael Jackson. I worked with Madonna. If you're doing the VMAs and Michael Jackson is booked on the show and you're the producer and the director, you don't want to talk to him directly. You want a buffer. You want somebody who's polite and diplomatic, who can deal with him and his management, and then go back to the talent executive and explain what they need or explain to them why you're running late. You basically want a buffer between you, if you're the producer of a show, and the actual talent on a show. So that's where my world came in. We're like mercenaries in live TV. We don't show up in the credits. Everyone knows us, and they know that we can deal with these people.
It's so
because
true.
you can't go to school for that. You call in somebody who's already dealt with that.
It's a very rare skill.
Right.
It really is.
It's very rare because you have to be diplomatic, but you also have to be funny. You do. You have to show up and get everybody. You have to keep them in the right headspace. And you have to be smart, and you have to be quick, and then you have to disappear while you're still in the room.
That's it. And that was my gig.
You also get to hear a lot of secrets. You get to see a lot of things that they would otherwise not share with the world. And they assume you're going to be completely respectful and not share it with anybody else.
And you You are and I was. That's the
Right.
other unwritten rule in my world, is that you don't say anything. I worked with Michael Jackson. I've worked with Bill Clinton. I've worked with Madonna. I've worked with Elton John, when he
Stable,
fired
average people. No problem there at all.
Yeah. But my point is, you don't talk about it. If you talk about it, you're out of the business. And I never talked about it until 2016 when I had to. When I said, I don't care if I work again, this guy's a drug addict and everybody needs to know, because he's unstable. I wanted to tell people what we saw. And also, I'll just say what everybody else saw. I'm not the only guy who saw this, and there's people who saw a lot worse than me. Trust me.
Because we've all said to each other and to everybody else that, how is it possible that everyone who lived in New York wasn't aware of what this guy was like, and why did no one in the media really publish the truth about Donald Trump? And the reality of it is, people in New York did know. A lot of the people in the news business knew, and I was one of the people in the news business. I didn't get as close to him as others, but I certainly, there were understandings that he wasn't the most up and up kind of guy. The people at NBC in particular, we'll play a little tape of that later on, they really were aware of what was going on. And yet they kept bringing him onto their shows all the time and built up this persona through The Apprentice of this guy that was a stable leader. He, regardless of what you thought of the show, which was a lot of crap, but he came across as someone who was strong and powerful and could lead an organization for 10 years. It was 10 seasons, I think. After 10 years of that diet being fed to Americans in prime time, you would have assumed, hey, he could probably run the country. And, as it turns out, he can't. So this was probably the biggest propaganda effort to try and create the next president of the United States. And whether they did it willingly or knowingly, who knows? But it certainly that was the end result of it.
Absolutely. And I think, Mark Burnett maybe had some eyes on a larger prize, but for the rest of us, or at least people in my world, Trump was a joke. I grew up in New York in the 80s. He was a punchline, and no one took him seriously. He can't, he can't read. Like, he literally is like dyslexic. Like, a 3-syllable word freaks him out. So nobody thought, like, this guy's going to be the president. And everybody, at least the people I knew in New York, knew that, he didn't have any business acumen. Everyone knows what he did. He laundered money, and he went out to clubs at night and chased models around and got high like that. I'll shut up, but I worked on the beauty pageants too.
This is what we want to hear.
But I remember this one anecdote always sticks out. I'd seen him, like, right before I worked on a pageant. I was doing a VMAs, Video Music Awards at Radio City, and they closed off 51st Street, and it was a big, long red carpet, and Trump pulled up, because he wanted to go to the VMAs. I think Ivanka was his date, and I'm not kidding. Like, literally, teenage Ivanka was his date. And he gets out of the limo, and he's waving at everybody, and I'm standing next to a cop, and I'm like, oh my God, Donald Trump, because you grow up in the 80s as like this cartoon character, and he goes, you never met him before? And I said, no. And he goes, oh, dude, I used to be on his security detail. That guy's the biggest poon hound in New York City.
Really?
Pardon me. He goes, he's out every night in the clubs trying to bang models, bro, and getting high. Like, that dude is a player. The cop was saying it like it was kind of a cool, funny thing. And this guy was a patrol cop. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This guy was in uniform guarding like a public
Which is
event.
fine. If that's what he wanted to do as a businessman, a reality show star, or whatever, it's all the power to him. But
he put a lot of effort into it. It was a lot.
Right. And that's what my point is, that was public knowledge. Like, nobody took Trump seriously. He was a socialite. Trump would have rather been famous. He is famous, but he would have rather have been some sort of celebrity than president, I think.
I call it the Citadel. I call the New York a Citadel. It's like you go in, you're surrounded by all these other rich and powerful people. You get to hang out with them in all the parties, and you get to see them all the time. You learn secrets about them. But there is this sort of rule that no one talks about the people inside the Citadel to anybody outside the Citadel. If there are secrets, there are secrets, and you're not meant to share those secrets outside. And so, news anchors can be gay for 20 years and not have to come out of the closet because it's a secret that we all just held for whatever reason.
I was looking the other night at my old spy magazines from the 80s. My mom gave me a subscription I was in high school, so I was 16, and I had no idea. We lived in New Jersey, and I had no idea who half of the people in the magazine were. But man, they are relentless. They were relentless attacking Trump. Every issue, They just hit him and hit him and hit him. And remember, it was Graydon Carter, I think, who wrote the short-fingered Bulgarian bit.
Yes.
And the line that makes him so crazy. Like, that's from Spy Magazine. And that was a long time ago, you know?
Right.
So he's been the object of ridicule for quite some time. I lived in New York City for 10 years. I don't know that it's a citadel as much as all that, but there is kind of an unspoken rule, which I don't know if it's the same even in Los Angeles, where there's a lot of tourists, more tourists, I think, and people spread out. When you see a celebrity in New York, you leave them alone. You don't engage. You don't go bother them at dinner because it's uncool. And you're in New York and you're a New Yorker and you're cool. So you have to like leave them be. So I think it's more that than anything else in terms of the Citadel thing. And also sort of because it's such a concentrated space, like Manhattan is really small. Yeah. And there's only so many restaurants and places to go. Sometimes you just see people just walking down the street and you're like, wow, that's so-and-so. And they're just walking down the street like I am. And okay, it's fine. I mean, I don't think Trump
and that in my don't have time. They don't have
New Yorkers don't have time, but they do keep each other's secrets. They don't have time to
mess around with.
If you only get to stay in the club if you keep everyone's secrets. Like the minute you start spilling secrets about people inside the club, you're no longer part of it. You don't get invited. So the access to the parties and to all these fancy events and the access to all these other celebrities comes with a sort of an unspoken agreement that you'll keep their secret. And that's how I think we landed up with a Donald Trump, being who he is, and the rest of the world not finding out about it until he became president.
That's an excellent point. I mean, Truman Capote was cast out of New York society for spilling the secret, and that same society is what Trump aspired to be. He was a kid from Queens who was never accepted, but he wanted to hang out with the Astors. He wanted to hang out with Peggy Guggenheim, and I lived in Carnegie Hill. I mean, that's my neighborhood in the city. And, it's a very small world, when you take from, if Trump is further down Fifth, but, all of these characters that we see on the national stage now all lived in one small area, like a 2 square mile, and you'd see them all. You'd see Geraldo, you'd see Sam Nunberg, you'd see Roger Stone around town, and these guys, I know the Weinstein brothers, like these are my neighbors. It still freaks me out seeing them on, where they've fallen, and keeping those secrets is also what allowed this to happen for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it works for them. Yeah. It doesn't work for the rest of us because here we are with Trump. So one of the biggest things you revealed about Trump is the drug use. You did it in a spectacularly public way. Tell us a little bit about what made you say what you did, and tell us about the story of telling the world about that.
Well, I'll just say, it's not about he's an active drug user. He crushes Adderall. That's his maintenance high. I've seen him do it. I've seen it fly out of his nose. And he's done cocaine. He does coke at parties. That also was not a secret. And ever since I came out about it, people come up to me. Right. That's that goes way back.
Both coasts knew that.
Right. Exactly. But the point in revealing, like, if he could do his job and still did drugs, I wouldn't say anything about it. I used to tour with rock bands. I took care of septuagenarian drug addicts for a living. Like, if you can do the gig, I'm not judging you. Yeah. So my point isn't like, ooh, drugs are bad. I have my own history with that stuff. My point is, if you know anything about addiction, the underlying mental state of an active addict is one of self-centeredness, and vindictiveness and seething resentment. And that's what you would see in Trump, So despite the fact that he's using these illegal drugs, it's the syndrome of addiction, the disease of being an active mental addiction that scares me the most. And that's why I chose to speak out. And I did it I was telling people about it, and, I didn't have much of a reach. So I went into stand-up comedy because I was like, well, it's a way to talk about it, and a way to sort of like, it was therapy for me as an artist, because I was a performer and an actor, and I was like, I just got to get this off my chest. I got to tell you guys what you're dealing with. I traveled the world with like David Crosby. I worked with the Stones. Like, I've been around rock stars. This guy's the craziest drug addict I've ever met in my life. And I'm not saying that mildly. If you get my point and you really understand addiction, it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not, oh, he's doing a little coke with models. He's thinking about himself all day long. And that's what you see in his tweets. It's all resentment. It's all self-centered fear. It's all me, me, me. The last thing you want in a leader is somebody who's thinking about himself. You want a leader who's like, this is about you guys, not me. You know, how can I help you? Trump's only about himself. And I'll shut up. But the reason I really went public with it is the guy I know would drop a bomb to save face. The guy I know is so detached from reality that if he thought he was going to be publicly embarrassed, I could see him literally like starting a war. And we're kind of seeing that now.
Well, we have seen it. I mean, we saw some sociopathic behavior from him all along.
Yeah,
like every time he can, he'll distract no matter what. And it does all seem to be revolve around him. It's hard to, I don't want to psychoanalyze somebody, but it's hard to tell whether the drugs were treating the sociopathic tendencies or the other way around. But, one of those might have been a precursor to the other. You decided to do this in public, in like a comedy show. You were doing comedy routines, or? Yeah, I was doing it. How did it go down? How did it, what were people like when you were out there saying all the stuff? They react with? They
were like, oh my God, that totally makes sense. Like, I get it, and then they'd wait around after the gig. I would do it at Gotham's and Caroline and stuff, and Caroline's, and they'd be like, is that true? And I'm like, 100% true. And I tell people, like, you see it for yourself. That's why he's sniffing in the debates. I mean, that sniffing is from sniffing it back up. If you look at the side of his nose, you can see where he had a septoplasty, because he did so much coke that he blew out like the inside lining of his nose. You'll see the big scar right there. Wow. And I would tell people, like, if you don't believe me, go look for yourself. Go look at the evidence yourself of the guy you see in front of you.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And
you can't get a job in America in a lot of companies if you have a drug test. But apparently, you can be the president of the United States.
Right. And let me just make this other point. I live on the Upper East Side, and like I know a lot of people that have had drug problems. And I don't use any drugs anymore. I've had my own history with that. So I'm somebody who's in recovery. I don't talk about that stuff publicly, but I'm in recovery. So I know a lot of people on the Upper East Side that got their drugs from the guy who gave Trump his drugs. And that's Dr. Bornstein. He was known as a Dr. Feelgood on the Upper East Side. And that's why the first thing Trump did when he became president was send Keith Schiller, and another guy, possibly Matthew Calamari, to Dr. Bornstein's office.
I remember that.
Yeah,
cleared out everything.
And they took his medical records. Right? And that wasn't because he has high cholesterol. You know what I mean?
It wasn't because of his alopecia drugs or whatever it was he was taking.
Are you sure it wasn't the Valtrex?
The Valtrex might be some of it. He's a Valtrex user as well. But
speaking of Schiller, he is part of our game that I want to play with you tonight.
I was somewhat joking.
Somewhat. The game I want to play is called Real or Trump. I'm going to show you a few things, and you just have to tell us whether it's real or Trump. Meaning,
this is so new.
It should be fun. I know. I just did it a few minutes ago, so it's a little rough.
Is it real? Could it be real and Trump? Because that's his Twitter handle, Real Donald Trump.
Oh, it's so true. It can be. Well done. Well spotted. Yeah. So the first one here is about whether it's true, whether it's real or Trump, that The Apprentice saved Donald Trump's fortunes.
That's true.
It is true. So tell us when and how that happened. We're talking about.
Well, he had blown his money. He'd blown his father's inheritance. So by the time Mark Burnett came to him, he had blown the $400 million through his bad investments and his properties that were failing, and needed a paycheck. So when Mark Burnett came and NBC gave him that paycheck, that was like the first real paycheck they had in a long time. That's why he got all his kids involved. They would like ask for per diems. That's what I mean?
The most money he's ever made, really, on a real basis. Yeah,
easily. Right. And when they went the first season, my friends were like the production guys and audio guys on The Apprentice. I worked on the celebrity version, which came about later. But when they went to film the first season of The Apprentice in like 2003 or 4, they went to his office, and all the furniture and everything was so ratty that they had to rent furniture from a prop company to make it look like the guy was actually a billionaire and a big shot.
I was going to ask you about that. It's like was the helicopter in that sequence real at the beginning? Was it his
helicopter?
The
helicopter was real.
So at least he had that.
No, he had the helicopter. He had things with his name on the side.
Right.
But he didn't have cash flow. He was sort of property rich, name rich, because most of his properties are licensing deals, but cash poor. And that's why he took a star deduction on his income tax every year in New York City. If you know what that is, you have to make less than $500,000 to qualify for a star deduction.
Wow.
It has to do with the public schools. He would take it every year. And when he got busted, he would say it was a mistake, and then he would take it again.
Wow.
There's nothing too petty for him. And he's like, he's a fraud. As you're seeing now, it's that look. So did you get that from my Twitter?
I happen to stalk your Twitter account a little bit today and your Instagram. It's good research.
Let me tell you about that. That hangs in 8H. In SNL, if you've ever been where they film SNL at NBC Rock Center, the hallways have pictures of all the hosts that this woman, Marianne, I believe is her name, took throughout the years. So if anyone's ever hosted, you get your picture on the thing. So that's Trump's picture from when he hosted. But he made them Photoshop his hand. If you see how large his hand looks.
He does have a very large hand there.
Yeah. They blew it up.
So this is a Trump. This is not a real. This is a Trump because of the hand. We will say.
Right.
It's a real photo of a Trump hand.
That photo, if you go just to the right of the Page's desk, just down the hallway, that photo's on your left, about 4 in.
I wonder how they photoshopped it. It looks pretty good for Photoshop, actually, and it does look like a normal size hand, which is a good thing, I guess, for him. This is on the opening of The Apprentice. There's all these companies that are listed that apparently people in The Apprentice could work for or could own or run. I don't know how they did it if they won The Apprentice. So in this case, there was a company called Capital Edge Corporation. Is this a real or a Trump?
That looks like a Trump to me.
Looks like a Trump. Does anyone else recognize this name?
It looks like Cyrillic letters. I think if I'm blurry, it looks, almost like it's Russian. No, I don't know. I don't know.
It's possible. Okay, two more. This one I'm really interested in. So here is a picture.
Right, but what is it? Is it real or Trump?
I would say it's a Trump, and I think Noel said it was a Trump too. Trump. Yeah, I don't think he really owned those companies. He was just like, run one of my companies, but it wasn't really them.
Oh, yeah. No, he doesn't have any companies. There's 5 people that worked in his office.
Well, that's what I think he was trying to get away with the idea that you could run Capital Edge Corporation if you wanted to.
Right. Calamari.
Exactly.
Guys.
So this is a photo from your Instagram that you took at one of the Apprentice finale tapings, I think. And if you look closely on the left-hand side is Kurt Schiller. You were just talking about him earlier on, and he was for a while the president's sort of head of security. And what do you think he's doing over there?
Well, I know what he's doing because I was there and I took the photograph. And that's our final home. The last 3 seasons was the Museum of Natural History. And ironically, the Lafrac Theater. Richie Lafrac is a good friend of Trump's. But so if you know the Museum of Natural History, the ground floor is like where they have the IMAX theater and all that. So we filmed that there. That's Keith pulling a blonde. He's pulling that blonde to bring her to the after party for his boss.
So Trump used to send out Kurt Schiller to go and get these blondes and literally from the crowd pointing at her there saying, come on, get her. That's for the boss tonight. Wow.
Exactly. Which is what they used to do in the rock and roll business. And they stopped doing before my time, but it's called a pull. That's the technical term.
It's got an actual term.
Yeah, a pull.
It's an industry term.
It is.
Well, he might still do it. Who knows? He might still show up at his. Maybe that's why he likes to go out on the road so much. He likes to,
100%. That's why he goes to Mar-a-Lago. That's why he's in Bedminster, because he doesn't like the people around him. There's too many eyes in D.C. He's not bringing. They're not doing any polls at the White House, But
this is the least likeliest person in the world who you think would want to be president of the United States. Like he just does not feel like he fits the role at all. Did he ever talk about politics? I mean, did he ever come across as someone who was interested in politics? It was just like power and greed.
Here's the one thing he did is that he would walk around like he was president even back then. And like that right there, that where we shot there, we had the after party at like a ballroom that's connected to the Museum of Natural History, and it's up a flight of stairs. Yeah. It's like a big one, right? So when this ended, half an hour later, the party would start. Trump would wait out in the hallway until all the celebrities got into the party. And there's celebrities, I'm talking like Tom Green. It wasn't like Beyonce was there. You know what I mean? It was like museum, it was like Celebrity Apprentice on a Sunday night in like May, So it was like, celebrity is a real loose term, But Trump would wait by himself with Keith and a couple other bodyguards until the room was packed. And then he'd want to make a grand entrance. So he'd walk in with those guys doing like a phalanx in front of him, like it was like they were Secret Service. And he would walk in, you know, with his head up in the air, like everybody was going to turn and be like, wow, look, the president's in the room. But he never
likes this pomp and ceremony of it all more than he
Wait,
Exactly.
did they stop and turn? Does he have that sort of natural charisma?
No, he doesn't. You laughed because you'd already just seen him. Because the only celebrities, right? It was literally
He's making another entrance.
right. It's like we just spent 4 hours with you trying to get through this taping while you we had to stop down because of whatever technical difficulties.
That's fantastic.
But
I mean, contrast with
but
on The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan thing. There's these. It was like when that guy walked into a room, you could sense it even before you saw him. You knew he was there,
right.
and he had this and has this incredible charisma. So, which, just to be clear,
Noel
Trump does not
that,
have.
Right.
Yeah, and
He
I've
does
met
not.
I've met Jordan. Like Jordan does have charisma. Bill Clinton has that kind of charisma.
Yes,
Obama has that in spades. President Obama is like, boom, you're turning and looking at that guy, and he's
you can feel it.
Right.
You can.
Right.
It's like a negative. It's the negative space that
You can
Einstein
feel
talked
it.
about. Right. Like
Right.
it's got
And then
information going in there. You can feel when these people are in the room or when
Absolutely.
they're coming, and you can feel it. And if
You can-
you're someone who has some kind of charisma or anything like that, you can get a sense of that. So, and if you're around it, there's no not feeling it.
Right.
So Donald's been around enough in his life and his social circles. He's been around enough celebrity and sort of legendary people. He's put himself in situations where he can be around them, that he's sensed that. There's no way you cannot have that experience of that energy. And I assume just really coveted that, like really wanted that for himself.
He did, but you can't fake that, you know, and I've been around a lot of that too. And there's people that'll play that up. Michael Jackson would make you lock down the hallways when he would walk through. And I would have to tell like U2 at the VMAs, they had to stand down because Michael was coming by, you know. I don't want to get in trouble, but you know, like other famous female singers have done that kind of stuff, and it's manufactured, and you sense it. The people that have it naturally, like I've worked with Springsteen, you know, Bruce Springsteen, that guy emanates this energy, and he'll put on a baseball hat and try to blend in, because when you really have it, you know how attractive it is, and you want to diffuse it in public situations. Right. You don't want people looking at you. If you really got it, you can't turn it off, and you want to hide it. You know,
because you don't necessarily want people coming at you all the time in the way that.
You never do. Yeah.
And they also the real pros in my experience in that business is the real pros were always the people that you were like down to earth and really you were able to talk to and deal with. It's the sort of the people who weren't really putting the attention into the work that were so into glamorizing themselves and getting all that attention.
That's very astute. Yeah.
So by the way, we're on Periscope. If anyone wants to join with questions.
There's someone saying, who did drugs with him? Name names. That's not going to happen. We're not going to do that.
Well, I mean, it's up to Noel. Who did drugs with him?
Who did drugs? Oh, they were talking about the people in the city. Yeah. That's like people that would come up to me in like Central Park and be like, I still have, you know, marks on my coffee table from when Trump came over, you know, doctors and people that lived in Park Avenue. If you want a good drug story, though, a friend of mine who works in this same business was the transportation guy. You know, and when you do one of these events, you know, people come out and get in their SUV and they drive, and then they tell our department, okay, we're ready for, you know, Kid Rock. Okay, bring out Kid Rock or whoever, you know, and you keep it moving. That's what the transportation coordinator does. So my buddy is like, owns the limo company. He's one of the transportation coordinators. And we were doing a show in 2002 called VH1 Fashion Rocks. Yeah, it was called Fashion Rocks. Yeah,
I remember Fashion Rocks. I used to go to those things. Yeah, it was a CBS thing.
They were kind of fun, you know. And so Trump came one year, and there's actually footage of him hitting on one of the models on the red carpet while he has a pregnant Melania, I believe, next to him. You can look that up. Yeah. But when at the end of that show, he came out and got in a limo with a bunch of models and started doing lines in the back of the limo, but wouldn't pull out of the alley. You know, it was being shot at like the Armory or something. Yeah. So the guy, my buddy's like, hey, can you just move? And he's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And he's just
They're too busy
there,
doing my
like,
lines. Get out of my. I'm going to park
it's
here.
like, I'm getting high with all
Of course,
these blondes.
yeah.
And it's like,
Don't you know who
care,
I
just-
am?
Right, do it down the block so we can bring in the next empty car and empty this building out. You know?
So
But-
tell me, this is around the time Melania and him met, right? You were sort of the guy looking after him when Melania and him must have been introduced to each other.
No, I mean, I first met him in the 90s on beauty pageants before Melania came in the picture. She was already married to him and they already had a kid by the time I started doing the Celebrity Apprentice, which was late 2000s, 2007. Right. I will tell you that there's no love lost between the two of them. You know,
No?
She shows up kind of separately. They look at each other sort of with daggers. She stands back. You know, she's there for the photo op and then she's out of there.
It's just work for her. It's just work.
Yeah, it's a contractual obligation.
And was it
I
different?
don't know if I believe that because they really look very happy. They look so natural together. You know,
they're probably snuggling right now in Bedminster.
So tell me a little. Go ahead.
Hang on a second. So yeah. I don't want to just skate over that. So you said that you worked with him in the pageants. In the
pageants, yeah, the beauty pageants. That was my first experience with Trump. And that's when he would line up all the girls and, you know, that's when he was really like unfettered, really disgusting Trump because he owned the pageant. There wasn't, you know, way pre-Me Too. Do you know what I mean? Like the 90s were almost like the Wild West.
So you must have viewed the pageants.
I'm aware of that era.
Right.
You must have viewed the pageants as sort of a personal hunting ground. Like just for him, it must have been just I've got a candy jar here and I'm going to get whatever I want.
That's exactly what it was. And that's how he had a clause in all the thing that he could pick the winner, you know, that like he would get the ultimate say on who won the thing. So he would line up the girls and he did this the first year he did this, you know, cameramen are sitting around disgusted, you know, and I'll tell this one story. Like, you know, it costs a lot of money to film a television show. Yep. You know, a live show, you got all these union guys on set, cameramen.
On location, that's a multi-million-dollar thing, yeah.
It's a fortune. You know, an hour is costing you, you know, $500 million, right? So Trump comes out and lines up all these girls and takes an hour inspecting them, sticking their fingers in their mouth, checking their teeth, all this stuff, walking up and down the line. Cameramen are disgusted. You know, they're going home and telling their wives, like, you won't believe this creep. You know, he'd pick out his favorite.
Nobody stopped him?
Nobody stopped him.
Nobody say anything.
Nope. What are you going to say?
Right? Isn't that amazing that no one says anything?
Yeah, it is. But look, the guy's got NYPD security detail with him. His name is on the pageant. Yeah. You know what I mean? He wasn't assaulting them in front of you. Yeah. He was just displaying really boorish. But let me just finish. He was displaying really boorish behavior in an industry which allowed that. If you're the rich, famous guy, you know, a lot of people knew what Harvey Weinstein was doing too. Yeah. You know what I mean? People are there to get their seven. Yeah, they're there to get, same with this gig, you know, they know what he's doing, right? But let me just show you how it becomes normalized. So he does that the first year. It wastes an hour of very expensive union time, right? The DGA, you know, the director's sitting in the truck, the agents, people are disgusted. They go home and tell their wives about it. When the next year rolls around and it's time to film, you know, the pageant finale, when you look at the production schedule, there's a stop down. Trump inspects the pageant. You know, Trump inspects the contestants. No crew call needed.
No crew's there.
So they this is how they normalized it. They built it into the production schedule so you wouldn't have the cameramen show up until that ended. Right. So you weren't having to do their start time and losing an hour of union labor. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's shocking. That's even worse, you know.
And then it just continued for
that means they knew about it and they still didn't do anything about it.
Right.
How old were the pageant people? Is this the Teen America thing or this the regular?
Miss Universe.
Okay,
but Miss Teen was 14 to 17. Miss Teen USA, which his daughter hosted at when she was 16 and stuff. And there's some disgusting footage of that. I mean, if you see how she was just ogled on the camera and Trump looking at her with pride as this guy's hitting on her. There's a great clip. You should look it up.
I'll definitely look at that.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm going to pass. I've seen enough of this.
There's a lot of pictures of her, of the two of them that are really disturbing that you can't help but think.
And I saw all that. You know, that is a very twisted, this is like Game of Thrones situation, you know, and she runs it behind the scenes. She runs the show. She knows how to manipulate daddy. I always tell people Trump wants to get high. He wants music to play when he walks in the room and he wants to hit on girls. Right. You know, Trump is into what is going to satisfy his narcissistic needs in that moment. You know, that guy's not thinking, he's not a long game player. He's like, how do I feel good right now?
Right.
How does that hot blonde come over here and hit on me, or I hit on her and all the other men admire me and think I'm powerful? Like, that's the extent of his psyche.
So what you're saying is kind of crazy when you think about it. If she's got the power and she's in the White House, is she really running the ship in there? I mean, it seems like it's so much disarray that she might be. I mean, maybe through her husband Jared, but still.
The two of them, they're a team, you know. And I met them before they were dating. They broke up, then they got married. They're a team. And while Trump is out there being crazy and keeping us all distracted on Twitter all day, they're doing their things. You know, Jared lost. You know this 666 Fifth Avenue. You know, Cutter bought his debt out.
Right.
When Jared and Ivanka were dating, Jared was out of there. Trump would call him the Jew. You know, is the Jew here yet? Like, he didn't want any part of that. You know, they got back together at the behest of
his daddy, right?
Wendy Dang Murdoch is the one who put them back together after they broke up. It was like, you know, Wendy Dang Murdoch, who's married to Rupert Murdoch.
And a Chinese spy, by all accounts.
Right. Rumored to be Putin's girlfriend, right? Got them back together. All of a sudden, they're married now. We're probably in season 2 or 3. We shot it at Skirball, which is down at NYU, right? The after party was at Trump Soho, which was never really in Soho.
Right.
It was like north of Houston or whatever. But Trump insisted.
I know. It's like
right.
calling it Soho, but it wasn't there.
But anyway, that season's after party was there after the taping.
Oh wow!
All right, who was there? Noel, who was there?
Felix Sater, who had Trump Organization business cards, and I watched, and he worked the room with Jared and Ivanka, and the entire audience was like Russian mobster types. You know, it was like our cast, you know, our invited audience for the actual taping was all these like Russian dudes with like women with fur coats, and it was like the end of May.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
So that was used as an incentive to bring people in to buy condos at the Trump Soho. The Apprentice after party was that? And that's
what I observed was Felix making introductions with Jared and Ivanka to this room full of Russians, to a disproportionate amount of Russians. I shouldn't say it's all Russians, but I saw what looked like business being done, if you know how that kind of business is done. You know, so while Trump is being this buffoon in the background, these guys, as I said earlier, were looking at the long game. You know, they were seeing, how can we use this?
There was an investigation into them they were investigated by Cyrus Vance, I think, at the time, and that's what that $25,000 payoff went to Vance's campaign, because he was going to charge them for, you know, overestimating the number of sales that they were achieving at that place, at that Trump Soho, and the entire place was built basically by Kazaki money, you know, because from a bank in Kazakhstan that was basically funneled through a whole bunch of people and landed up in Trump's pocket. So that's how the thing was financed.
And they also strong-armed the historical society when they built it. When it was built on the site of an old church that was an abolitionist church, and there was a lot of escaped freed slaves that were in that ground. And they built it basically on ground that was filled with the remains of freed slaves that had made it to the north. And it was a real historical society issue, and they were supposed to, you know, get permitting and all this stuff, and they just strong-armed it, which is an interesting aside if you think about who this man is.
Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative, and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and download.